Guys, welcome to your first AP chronological review. We're starting today with period 1, which is signified by the dates 1491 to 1607. So 1491 signals the fact that there are many diverse native cultures in existence prior to European contact. And then by 1607, we see the first permanent European settlement in the New World with the founding of Jamestown. And so we're going to refer to this as three cultures collide, and you'll see why in a moment. Before I get into it, I do just want to remind you guys that period 1 can potentially appear on several sections of the AP test. It's very common to appear in the multiple choice section. It's very common as a short answer, and it is always a potential LEQ as well. So our first kind of big picture story is this idea of very diverse native cultures, and that diversity is attributed to environmental factors. So while there are hundreds of native tribes in North, Central, and South America in the 1400s and well before, what we're going to do is hit on a couple of these in the event that you do get a question on this topic. So to show you guys just how diverse some of these settlements were, a couple of examples are the Great Plains natives, which are kind of in the modern day Midwest, the Mississippi River Valley, which of course are located along the Mississippi River, and then of course the Southwest. So specifically to go back to the Great Plains Native Americans, what you're going to see here is that many of these tribes are nomadic hunters, meaning they move around and hunt primarily in search of the buffalo. Some are farmers, but ultimately you see a little bit of both in the Great Plains area. In the Mississippi River Valley, again, because a lot of these civilizations are located along the river, the soil, is very fertile. There's a lot of hunting and fishing and farming going on. And one of the most well-known civilizations would be the Cahokia, located in southwestern Illinois. And at one point, the Cahokia civilization reached approximately 30,000, which actually rivals a lot of European cities at the time. And then, of course, we have the Southwest. I'm speaking primarily to civilizations in modern-day New Mexico and Arizona. They were known for their Pueblo-style houses. In fact, the Pueblo is one example of a civilization. And these houses were made out of kind of a mud straw combination that kept everybody cool in this hot, arid community. And there's also evidence of irrigation systems that were created to bring water in to allow many tribes to farm, again, in this very hot, dry environment. However, one of the things that's really important to note about pre-Columbian civilizations is maize cultivation. So maize is corn. And it's important to note because when you look back at many pre-Columbian civilizations, the Aztecs in Mexico are a great example. Civilizations that have a stable food source tend to be a little more sophisticated and tend to survive a little bit longer. So when you look at the Aztecs or even the Incans, they had stable food sources, whereas that stable food source didn't necessarily exist for a lot of these Northern American tribes. All right, moving on. We're going to talk about how both Europe and the Americas become connected. So it's important to note before we talk about that connection, what's happening in Europe. And in Europe, you have European countries looking for specifically trade routes to the East Indies, and they're looking for routes that don't necessarily have them crossing throughout Europe and Asia. And so in addition to that, as well as some new technology, many European countries fund voyages across the Atlantic Ocean in search of trade routes to the East Indies. And we know that Christopher Columbus, the Italian voyager who sailed for the Spanish crown, mistakenly found Haiti, but was able in his several voyages to connect the Americas with Europe. And so the connection and transfer of goods that came of the Colombian voyages became known as the Colombian Exchange. So if you take a look at this graphic here, you can see how, as a result of European contact, crops like tobacco, squash, avocados, potatoes and tomatoes and corn, again, maize, made their way to Europe. But from Europe, coffee beans, citrus fruits, livestock, horses are going to be monumentally important, especially for nomadic tribes. And of course, diseases came from Europe to the Americas. Additionally, it's important to note that one of the diseases that is going to impact the natives significantly is going to be smallpox. So again, keep in mind that a lot of these native civilizations have no immunity to these European diseases. So disease, specifically smallpox, is going to be the number one factor that decreases the native populations over the next several hundred years. I will speak about the fur trade, but the French specifically set up fur trading posts in what is known as the modern day Midwest. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about that in our next and final big picture story and theme. And that, of course, is the European treatment of Native Americans. So during this time, you really had three countries interacting with natives. You had the British, the French, and the Spanish. I always use a little mnemonic device to help myself remember that European treatment. The British viewed the natives as fairly barbaric. The French had friendlier relations and depended on the natives for the fur trade, and the Spanish implemented a system of slavery. So let's break that down. First and foremost, the British are the ones that will eventually settle permanently. But one of the things that the natives in North America did to protect themselves is they created the Iroquois Confederation, which was a political union of these 5 tribes here in northern present-day United States. They will go on to defend themselves from British settlement and civilization all the way through the American Revolution. Then, of course, we've got the French, and again, they are primarily going to be settling in the modern-day Midwest and using the natives to help them create a lucrative fur trade. They will also try to Christianize the natives in the process and do have a much friendlier relation. But the most kind of significant relationship would be the Spanish. So specifically, Spanish conquistadors or conquerors came over to the New World, primarily looking for items like gold and silver to bring back to Europe. And in order to find those materials, they implemented what is known as the Encomienda System. And if you take a look at this graphic, the intent of the Encomienda System was that Spanish soldiers would protect, care for, and Christianize natives. And in exchange, these natives would work for the Spanish settlers, hopefully finding that gold and silver. The reality of the situation is that the natives were not paid for their labor, and that the natives were exposed to not only harsh living and working conditions, but intense numbers were killed as a result of disease. Okay, so moving along, there is somebody that does begin to question the Encomienda System, and that is Bartolome De Las Casas. He is a Spanish priest, and while he owns land and slaves in the West Indies, he does begin to advocate for better treatment of natives and even persuades the King of Spain to implement the new laws of 1542 to end the Encomienda System. Unfortunately, there were other well-known Spaniards that were able to convince the king to repeal parts of these laws, but ultimately De Las Casas was known for at least throwing the idea out there that perhaps the treatment of natives in the New World was immoral, and he was, of course, a little bit ahead of his time. Specifically, in addition to the Encomienda system, if you guys take a look at this over here, after the Encomienda system and so many natives died of disease, the Spanish did begin to bring in African slaves, and this was known as the Asiento system. And so what you're going to see here in the New World is kind of a class system develop of Spaniards, Creoles, which are a mix of Spanish and Black ancestry, and then two terms that you'll see again, mestizos and mulattoes. So in addition to slavery, the Spanish were known for intermixing and intermarrying with the natives. So a mestizo is somebody who's of Spanish and native descent. A mulatto is somebody who is of Spanish and Black descent. And then, of course, you have the slaves here at the bottom. I also threw on here the Pueblo Revolt of 1680. And while the Pueblo Revolt doesn't necessarily fall within this time period, it just goes to show you that there were civilizations that tried to fight against European rule. The Pueblo were successful in driving the Spanish out for approximately 12 years. And so that's probably one of the most significant and successful resistance movements within this time period. So folks, again, we have super diverse native civilizations prior to European contact. European contact with natives does open up an exchange of goods, but it does also come at a cost, and different European powers do interact with natives in different ways. We hope that helps you guys remember what was going on in period 1, and we will continue to do a little more review in class. Have a great day.